what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. Got a 2006 Acura MDX and we're going to do the rear brake pads and rotors on this. Now we could probably get these resurfaced, but not going to worry about that since I've got them. They're pretty inexpensive. I'm just going to go ahead and throw on the rotors and the pads. Now the first thing I like to do is push the caliper piston back in by wedging a screwdriver in there and prying that in. But before we do that, it's very important that we pop the hood, take a look at the brake fluid level in the master cylinder, and make sure that when you push this backwards, that's not going to overflow and make a big mess. So let's pop the hood and go take a look. All right, so here's our master cylinder right here, and you can see the fluid level is low enough so that it looks like we've got enough room to push the caliper piston back in without making a mess or overflowing that. A lot of people ask me if you need to remove this cap before pushing that caliper piston back in, and you really don't. Any air that's in there or pressure in there will easily be able to escape, and it really doesn't change the difference on the resistance. At least I haven't been able to notice that. I also usually leave the cap on because brake fluid is hygroscopic, meaning that it absorbs moisture, and that will cause it to degrade and go bad and eventually need to be changed. It is important to change your brake fluid from time to time, but in our case, we're not going to do that right now. You can just see that our fluid is low enough so that we can cycle it backwards and we should be good to go. Now, the easiest way I've found to push these caliper pistons back in is just by using a small flathead screwdriver, or even a small pry bar works too. Now, you can also take this off and use the caliper wind back tool, or you can also use a C-clamp. This just seems to be the fastest method, and that's what I usually do. If this pry bar fits, I'll usually use this because it's a little bit more stout. We're just wedging that in there and prying against the caliper, and see that piston moves. And then if you can shift it over in between the inside pad and the rotor, that usually will give you enough leverage to be able to push the caliper piston all the way back in. We can break loose and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts. Those are a 12 millimeter. And I'm just going to use the Milwaukee to zip those off real quick. Now this rear caliper is really light. These little hangers come in handy. Just kind of hang it up over here, out of the way. You really just don't want to let that dangle or let it drop from the brake line. Then we're going to pop out the old pads. All right, now we're going to take off this caliper bracket, and that's held in place by these two 14 millimeter bolts. All right, and then same thing, we'll just zip these off real quick. There we go. It's a good idea to have one hand on this as you take those out. Kind of ran out of room when backing this one out, but we got it. This is a rotor drum combo. You can see the parking brake is inside here. But before we can take it off, we have these favorite Honda Acura rotor screws that are holding this rotor on. Now those are a pain sometimes. These a lot of times will get stuck and you end up having to drill them out. I would invest in something like this. This is by Vessel. This is a JIS3 impact screwdriver, and what it does is if you strike the back of it, it will rotate slightly to loosen those, and it really helps prevent stripping. I'm going to hit the back of this with a sledgehammer while holding this, and hopefully that will loosen that. Got that one right away. See if we can get the other one here. Yep. Works really well. In the past, you know, holding this, it kind of bounced my hand around. I was trying to hold the shaft here, but that's not as effective. You do need to hold the handle nice and snug as you pound it. Now on these rotors, sometimes they do get stuck. A lot of times they'll stick right here to the hub. There's a few methods that you can use to take this off. Now you'll see right here that there are threaded holes in the rotor, and what you can do is find a bolt that will thread into there until it bottoms out on the face of the hub, and that almost acts like a press, and that will help you pop this rotor off. Or you can use the Tanya Harding method here and just hit it with a little sledgehammer, and sometimes that will knock it loose. Or if it really is a pain, I also have this 3-jaw puller. Sometimes I'll use that, and that will usually break them loose. But let's see if we can knock it loose here first. Looks like we got it already. There we go. And parking brake shoes look like they're still in good shape. All right, now before we put the new rotor on, I'm going to clean up the surface of this hub a little bit with a little wire brush here. This is just a little brass wire brush. I've got lots of these. They come in a kit, and they really come in handy cleaning up this surface, and then we'll hit that with some anti-seize as well. It's just important that you wear some safety glasses if you're going to use a wire brush like this on a drill. All right, and then we're going to hit the surface of that with some anti-seize, which this will help prevent that new rotor from getting stuck to the hub here. I think I did the brakes on this last time, and I probably did put a little bit of this anti-seize on here. All right, now you can also clean your brake shoes. I'm just going to knock off some of this dust with some brake cleaner. Should have done that before brushing on this anti-seize, but that's going to work just fine. Now, before we put on the new rotor, it's important that you wipe it off with some brake cleaner. Just wipe off all of these surfaces. These are packed in some oil to prevent them from rusting, so it's very important that you do this. Both sides. We're also going to wipe out the inside where the parking brake shoes will ride. That looks good. And then when we put this on, just make sure that you line that up so that these tapered holes right here line up with the threaded holes on the hub. Now take a look down here at the bottom. This is also your brake adjuster. So I just put on the rotor and it was a little too tight, but we can also access that with the rotor on through the little adjustment window. Now a lot of people say that these little screws here are only for manufacturing to hold the rotor on as the vehicle goes down the assembly line, and that may be true. If you don't want to reuse these, that's up to you. I like to put them back on just as they were. It seems to work just fine. Just make them snug, don't overdo those. Now you'll notice in the old rotor here we have this rubber plug, and we've got a hole here to accept that in the new rotor, so we just need to take that out. So just get some pliers or whatever you need to pry this little rubber plug out of the old rotor, and then we're going to put that in the new rotor. Now I should have mentioned it sooner, but you do need to make sure that you have your parking brake off before you try to take the rotor off, or it's not going to come off. You're going to have a really hard time. The parking brake is off. We just want a little bit of resistance there, not much. You should still be able to spin that freely. Now if you need to adjust these parking brake shoes, you can just pull this plug out that I just put in, and you can rotate that little star wheel up or down to loosen or tighten. These feel just fine to me. We've got just the right amount of resistance, very, very little, and that should be good. It's okay to have a little bit of resistance there, because when you drive this the first time, those parking brake shoes, they'll wear into the center of that rotor or drum. Now we need to get this caliper bracket ready for reassembly. So I'm going to pry off the old clips here, clean this with a wire brush, and then we're also going to clean and re-grease these slide pins here. So again, wear some safety glasses here if you're going to use a drill and a wire brush like I'm doing, but you can also just use a regular little wire brush. And we just want to clean out this little recess. See, it's starting to rust a little bit in there. Just need to get those nice and clean so that those clips will sit flush in there. All right, that looks good. Now we're also going to take out and clean and re-grease these slide pins. Sometimes these get stuck if they get real hot, or sometimes people will use the wrong grease in there, and that'll cause them to also stick. But pull back on the rubber boot and pull these out, and we'll just clean those off. And then put on some new grease here. We're gonna use this one here by Versachem. Just coat that really well and put it in. Now when you push them back in, you can squeeze the rubber boot. Sometimes air will get trapped in there. You do need to get that out. So I'll squeeze that and kind of burp the air out. Just make sure that they spin freely and move in and out without any binding. That looks good. Let's move on to this one here. Same thing. Just pull back on the rubber a little bit as you pull the slide pin out. This one has a little rubber bushing in the end. I usually do these slide pins one at a time to make sure that I don't mix up the location where the one with the bushing went. In our case, it goes in this side here, which is the bottom. Just get a nice little coat of brake grease on here. Now it's very important that you use the right kind of grease. This is silicone based, and this is made for calipers, and it works really well. We'll just pop that one back in. See, sometimes when you push it, the boot just pop up on its own. Squeeze any air out of there and make sure that it spins freely and moves in and out freely without pressing out. If it pushes out, it'll cause your brakes to drag. This looks good. Before I put the brake hardware on here, I'm also going to coat these little channels in here with a little bit of the same brake grease. Now that's more of just a protectant to prevent that from rusting and pushing those clips up. All right, and then the new clips, just make sure you get those oriented the right way and they just snap in. Just make sure that they're pressed in firmly. Same with the other side. All right, so we've got the new clips installed. Slide pins are greased. This is ready to go back on the car. Now, before I put the caliper bracket on, I'm gonna put a little bit of blue thread locker on these caliper bracket bolts. That's way too much. Perfect. And then we can just put this up here and get those started. I'm just going to snug those for now. All right, and then we're going to use the torque wrench and tighten these to 41 foot-pounds. Now Now you'll notice on the pads, this is the inside pad that had the little squealer or noisemaker on the inside facing down. So we're just going to make sure that we match that with our new pads. And these already have shims attached to the back, which is great. But I'm going to put a little bit of this silicone ceramic extreme brake parts lubricant on the back of this pad. What that does is that really helps dampen some of the vibrations, and this is really high heat, which is a little bit better. This stuff here, this caliper grease is good, but it can't really handle the high heat, and so that's why I'm going to use it here on the back of the pad. Now you know what, I'm going to actually put the pad in first, and then I'll put a little bit of that on. That brake grease is real sticky. And then same with the outside pad here. There we go. This felt a little bit tight at first, but just kind of wiggling that a little bit, I think that's going to be all right. I just don't want these to bind. That's really the intent of these clips and why it's important to brush that out before you put these clips in. If you get a lot of buildup in there and you don't clean out those channels and these clips don't sit flush, then the brake pads will get stuck in there and they won't be able to move or release as freely as they should. These look like they're okay now, but at first they did seem a little snug. Now this stuff's real sticky and a little bit goes a long way. I usually put this on before I put the pads in, but I've realized if I just wait and put a little bit on afterwards, it makes a little bit less mess. Just brushing a little bit on the back of that shim really does seem to help keep them running quiet, eliminate some of the vibrations and whatnot that can cause your brakes to make a lot of noise. But that looks good, and this is ready for us to put the caliper back on now. Let's take off our little hanger here and bring this around. Now here, these little slide pins have little flat spots on them. You might need to line those up with the flat spots on the caliper. The idea behind that is that so that the slide pins don't spin as you're tightening this. But we can put these little caliper slide pin bolts back in. And just make those snug. And then the torque spec on these caliper slide pin bolts is 27 foot-pounds. And you're done. Now it's very important before you drive off, besides putting on the wheel of course and torquing that to spec, it's very important that you step on the brake pedal several times. What that's going to do is push the caliper piston back out, pressing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Now when you do this, it's important that you don't step all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just pump the brakes about halfway several times until it feels firm, and you should be good to go. And then don't forget to double check the fluid level in your master cylinder before you head out as well. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description where you can pick up some of these parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.